on.
Were most important to that council. Organizational health and capacity was a clear priority. And in my opinion, of these four items, I would move number 4 up to the top. And because in my opinion, when you have a healthy organization with capacity, then it can deliver the core municipal services, and it will help with governance, and it will help with capital program delivery.
And just given that I know we have 7 councillors and possibly different ideas on what we each prioritize on this, would it be easier, Mr. Ferris, if we each sent you, say, an email or, you know, a list of where we would because there might be similarities back and forth. We do have another council meeting next week. If we can get this information to you by Friday, possibly we can, you know, actually come up with kind of a cognitive list of what, you know, what the joint of what everybody's looking for that way. Just as a suggestion anyways. Mr. Ferris, and I'm gonna go to the screen there.
We can definitely do that if we wanted to have council provide to me their recommendations and then me to provide a high level summary and prioritization by those responses. We can absolutely do that. I would just suggest that we now do have monthly GMPs, that it may be more appropriate at the GMP come March. But we can have it at the council meeting if that would please the committee as well.
Yeah. Councillor McNeil?
Thank you. Through the chair to council and administration. Part of my concern with this is I definitely hear administration's concern, and I think it's well founded, but especially with us just coming into the strat planning sessions coming up within a few weeks, I think this could potentially be a bit counterintuitive to have us focus on these priorities and then go into the strat planning session, which could technically come out with a whole different scenario for priorities. So my concern is that if we take the time and put something forward now and set administration on a direction, and then have our facilitated strat plan session, and then set a whole new direction, then we've then wasted administration's time for a month in the meantime.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor St. Martin?
Mr. Reeve, through to the committee and to administration, I believe I raised the question at the previous meeting about would council receive a consolidated version of the council survey, because I believe that would identify each individual councillor's priorities. And if it doesn't, then I could see why you're requesting this now. And I concur with Councillor McNeil. Even though we give you our individual priorities, that doesn't necessarily mean that is the collective decision of council as a whole, which would be vetted or determined through the strategic planning process. Thank you.
Mr. Ferris?
I can speak to that. I do not currently have a response from all councillors on that survey. I can absolutely provide a consolidated review of that. The responses I do have also been provided to our strategic planning consultant with the direction that they will incorporate that into the discussions of common themes as well. So you're absolutely right. We will be dealing with this to some degree. It is counterintuitive. This was brought up as a result of our last meeting there, where there was just some concerns about directional accountability, and so the hope was to get some clarity that way. But I would echo the comments of Councillor McNeil and Councillor St. Martin in terms of our strategic planning session is the first or second week in March, I think. And there's a lot of engagement that's going on there that way. But this was a discussion of a, hey, where are we going kind of thing that we thought was appropriate to have here. I can even work with the discussions I've heard to date, even to rebalance some of our prioritization administratively. But you will get some degree of a summary at the strategic planning to answer your question, Councillor St. Martin.
Councillor McNeil?
Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair to council and administration. Just for clarification, I know on my part of the discussion that we had at the last meeting, when I had mentioned priorities, and thanks for bringing this forward, what I was looking for specifically was a discussion at GMP about the priorities regarding what policies and bylaws were coming forward, so that council and administration can have a discussion and make sure. That's where I was going with,
Oh, okay.
are we on the same page? It wasn't so much about these priorities, it was just, for example, if administration is bringing forward bylaws that maybe council doesn't see as a priority or vice versa, then it would be able to engage that conversation. We'd be able to get a look into maybe 3 months down the road, what's on your plan. I know in past meeting, you had brought up and made a presentation about a number of what they were. So, but just that kind of an update is what I was looking for.
Mr. Ferris?
If that's the direction, sorry, Councillor McNeil, my apologies on the misunderstanding there.
No worries.
If the committee was happy to provide that direction, we have no problem at the GMP meeting in March there to provide you a list of the policies and bylaws that are in various stages of completion, to let you know, and the ones that we've also identified as needing potential additional work as well.
Okay, thank you.
So for today, for this this motion, does somebody want to make a motion then to defer this until after our strat plan session? Or just accept for information today, Mr. Ferris? Mr. Ferris?
I can't make a motion.
No, I'm just wondering what procedurally,
Procedurally, if we wanna do a motion,
what would be best for administration as well?
easiest thing for administration while ensuring the concerns of council, I think, would be to either accept for information or have a motion that administration provide a list of pending policies and bylaws under consideration for GMP to discuss priority alignment.
Councilor McNeil?
Thank you. Through the chair to administration, and council. If council is amenable to it, I would make the motion that CEO Ferris just mentioned as option 2 to, he had the wording there, but essentially make the motion that we bring forward the list at the next GMP meeting of what's on their project list for policies and bylaws.
Thank you, Councilor. Discussion on the motion? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All in favor? That's moved. Do we still need one for information for our discussion 7.1? We're good? Okay. 7.2 policy 5 or F-5.208 donations and donated assets draft.
Perfect. So this was requested by GMP to bring this back to you within Q1 for discussion. Historically, the county has received donations, both monetary and non-monetary, land, equipment, other assets. And our practice, in my opinion, has been inconsistent. And it's varied depending on the department, the record keeping, and due diligence is varied depending on the department as well, which is problematic. And then there's also been concerns that in the past, the county may have inadvertently acted as a flow-through entity for donations. And that does occur, but ultimately, from a CRA compliance perspective, we should never act as a flow-through. There's also confusions when people donate, particularly in the fire realm, donate to a fire department, and if they're donating it to the county with unclear donation history or direction, that those monies may end up being used inappropriately, and we don't want that when people are providing donations. So the direction was to come up with a policy. The goal of this policy is to confirm when we will accept donations. It highlights that we won't be a pass-through entity any longer. We put in thresholds that we believe are reasonable, but those are entirely arbitrary in nature. And so if council wishes to lower them or change them, our goal was to limit what comes to council when it comes to donations, because your time and energy are quite valuable, and dealing with $100 or $200 donation, I think is probably not best practice. It establishes considerations that if someone's donating something to us, do we have the capacity for it? Just because we can get a new piece of equipment or a donation, are there added costs? Do we have to replace that from a life cycle point of view, or is it a one and done situation? It also clearly, it's intended to more clearly separate fire donations. I believe they were the impetus for the request of this policy. And then also clarify that if the money's donated to the county, ultimately they can provide restrictions on how to use it, but it is the county's asset. And the issue there was particularly drawn, not that we've had an issue with it, but the concern with some of our great societies we have, particularly in the fire realm, is if they buy it, is it our asset? Is it their asset? If operationally we need to move it, does that become a problem for the society? Things like that. Now, this bylaws absolutely needs procedure. I have a draft procedure for structure thresholds, forms that must now be filled out both by the public and reviewed by multiple directors and myself, depending on the threshold. But currently they are draft because I don't know where council or the committee will go with this policy, and I didn't want to implement them otherwise. But those procedures would be implemented in conjunction with this. We believe from a draft point of view, this moves us ahead of where we were. And it will be a change for how we've received donations in the past, but happy to take feedback, discussion, questions. It is the first attempt of it.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Councillor Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Reeve. Through to administration, I have a couple of questions. I just need to pull this up. With respect to section 3A, it establishes a cap or a limit, or the way I read it, it establishes a cap or a limit on monetary donations and or assets with an estimated value of up to $35,000. In the event that a donation exceeded $35,000, what's the process? And then I have a second question.
Excuse me.
Through the chair to Councillor Dean, that would then go to council. So the threshold proposed in this policy would be that if it's $35,000 or less, and as long as it is not any one of those subcategories A through E, I have the authority to deal with it. The moment it involves land, even though it would be less than 35 grand, I have to bring it to council. That's the intent of the structure, at least.
Okay, and then the second question I have relates to fire services specific provisions. What I'm reading here from an overview is that if a donation is made to a fire service through like to a society, in order for any equipment that might be purchased with that donation to be used by that fire department, that if they use it, let's say it was some kind of a pump, that it then technically becomes possession of the county. Am I correct in the way I understand that?
Through the chair to Councillor Dean, yes, that's the intent. It becomes our asset. That way we can ensure that it's insured, that there's a replacement schedule. The reason being is we also don't just want random assets purchased that we can't use. as well. But yes, your question is yes is the answer, sorry.
Okay, the intent would not then be to take that asset and move it to a different fire service though.
Well, and through the chair, I to Councillor Dean, the intent would not be that, but because it is a county asset, if operational needs require it, I think you should have that authority. If all of a sudden Anselmo area has an economic development initiative or an increase in population or some type of industry that requires an item, and perhaps we have one that was donated from at another station, it makes sense to me to take our county asset and move it to where it can be best utilized. So you would be allowed to do that, would be my hope. If there were conditions placed on an asset that was being donated, at the review process, I would hope that factor would be considered. And if there were conditions like that, that becomes problematic to manage in the future.
Yeah, I don't think I understand the thought that went into drafting this portion. I know it's complicated. I just feel that if a fire department purchased something with donated monies, that fire department would be using that. It's not like they're gonna buy something that is a nice to have that they're never gonna use that then would be expendable. So in theory, I don't see that ever happening, but to leave it open like that is a bit contentious.
Councillor St.
And I'm
Martin,
done.
Councillor St. Martin,
Thank you, Mr. Reeve, through to the committee and CAO Ferris. I had for clause 1B, I'd like to see text in there that states unless authorized by council. And what I'm thinking here is the Westford Community Center. When that hall was built, there were substantial donations. And because the Agricultural Society is not a charity, people required receipts for their donations. So I think if there's a large construction project or something of that nature that warrants a flow through, I think council should be able to authorize that. And I do know that municipalities are considered charities with Revenue Canada. And as such, we are allowed to flow through as long as there is transparency of the money coming in and the money going out. So that's my comment there. And also under B, 2B, I just asked the question, what about bequests? Because that can be fairly large sums of money. So I don't know if you want to identify bequests in the policy. And then under 3, C, I just wanted to add text that would say the CAO will report any donation declined to council at the next regular council meeting. The reason for this is I wouldn't want to be blindsided by an individual or a group of people that are upset that their donation was declined. So I'd want to know that as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Mr. Ferris?
Just a clarity question to Councillor St. Martin regarding the amendment to 1B regarding unless authorized by council for the charity flow through. Would you also then want to require as one of the things that can be none of the conditions, clause F under 3AF saying the donator has requested a charity or has requested a receipt in relation to charity status or however the wording is, cause that way then it makes it clear that I don't have the authority as the CAO to authorize if it's in that list.
I would agree with that, yes.
Councillor McNeil and then Councillor Coogan.
Actually, first, through the chair to administration, I had a question. In 2025, I'm wondering how many donations there were, and I know we're aware of Camp Creek and council's aware of, there was also a financial donation in Blue Ridge that we had discussed. I'm curious, outside of those two, how many others there may have been?
Through the chair to Councillor McNeil, if, I don't believe there were anything significant. There may have been, as a result of the departments doing an in-kind thing where they were then donated some money, but it would have been just minor. There was, the significant ones were definitely the Camp Creek and I believe Pembina, from Pembina.
And Weyerhaeuser, I believe.
Okay, just as a follow-up to that, then I guess my comment in regards to the draft would be where we're not dealing with a very large amount of donations, and I think that it's something that can be, you know, extremely sensitive, and we definitely want to give our ratepayers every opportunity to come forward with donations, that I would like to move the 35,000 suggested cap down to $1,000. And have all rest, if there's a reason that administration feels that they may be declined or should be declined, then they'd be brought forward to council for any amount over $1,000. And that was my comment.
Mr. Ferris?
Just for a clarity point of view in relation to the thresholds. We can make that change if that's what council wishes. A good example of that though would be the Blue Ridge Fire Hall wants to buy sprinklers for the operations of the fire hall and the crews there. That's a $2,000 or $3,000 donation from our society. So would the intent be that that has to go to council to accept that donations of sprinklers? Is the clarification, is it over 1,000 or under 1,000 where you want the CAO to deal with it?
Through the chair to the CEO, where I was going with it was under $1,000, anything over 1,000 would go to council if you saw fit to potentially decline it, was my thing. Like if you get a donation and it's, you know, X amount, $10,000 say, or sprinklers like you mentioned, say $3,000, and you're perfectly fine with it, it's acceptable, everything's great, administration's happy, and we're accepting it, perfect. If you have concerns, then, you know, and where it may be declined, then I think if it's anything over $1,000, then I would recommend bringing it to council, not telling the donatee or the person who's providing the donation, well, we're considering declining it. Just say we have some questions or whatever it is, and we want to refer it to council for a decision.
So then, if I may, then basically somewhere in section 3 that where the CAO is of the opinion the item should be declined, it shall go to council for final decision.
Yeah,
Yep.
or, sorry, just to respond to that. I would maybe soften the language around where the CAO has concerns regarding the donation, that it be referred to council,
Okay.
as opposed to the CAO considering declining it, because that gives you more room and it gives more flexibility where the public is not holding you, you know, saying, oh, the CAO thinks we should decline it, when maybe you didn't. Maybe you just wanted more input from council, because maybe it was an asset that you might want to use at a different fire department, like Councillor Dean had mentioned, and you have concerns about that item moving from one department to another. That would be, to me, a good example of one that would go to council.
Perfect.
Councillor Coogan?
Yeah, through the chair to administration and council. Because a lot of this did come from the fire department. That's where the issue started, and it's been an ongoing issue for the last probably 30 years that I'm aware of. I think that one of the things that we need to define is that even though there's 4 stations in Woodlands County, there's 1 fire service. And if there is donations that are given to the fire service, that should be clear. Because I think that, you know, as those fire departments, some of them have societies where donations are given to, there's gonna have to be a clear definition of, you know, whoever's donating, what they want it donated for, where it's going. Because that's where the problem has arisen, is that fire departments went out and raised funds for certain assets. And then those assets were fought over because they were being used in the fire service. And then they weren't being transferred from one, wherever the need was. So I'm just curious, when we go, as we're going through this discussion, how do you let the public know that there's 1 fire service?
Through the chair to Councillor Coogan, there's a bunch of ways. Now I'm gonna speak in hypothetical because the procedure isn't finalized. If the procedure was to be adopted in its current form, any donation, regardless of the type, has an application form they need to fill out. Clause 1B indicates that the county will not act as a custodian or pass-through for any organization externally or society. When it comes to fire specifically, my answer is we are not taking those funds. They all have their own bank accounts. They all have their own structure outside of Woodlands County. On that checklist where they're saying fire service donation, it's going to be clear to them that if it's a fire donation to Woodlands County, that is going into Woodlands County's bank account. We will notify council as we're required, whether it be policy or just in our quarterly updates, that we've received those. And those funds will go into our reserve accounts. If they were designed to, let's say, buy organizationally wide an appreciation hat or something like that, we could do that. But if it's fire related, the application is going to make it clear that if it's going to Woodlands County, that is an organization thing. If you're happy that the Blue Ridge Fire Department put out a fire, saved your barn, your llama is still healthy because you saved it. Sorry, that was Goose Lake. Like if you're happy and you want to send a $200 appreciation to that group, we will catch that at the application process and say, we appreciate it. Here's the number of the Goose Lake guy. This will go to the Goose Lake Association and not Woodlands County. But the process there will incorporate that. And that's how we plan to address that.
Okay, so can I
Follow up, please.
follow up? Okay, so then in other words, if the individual fire departments have societies that then want to donate to the fire service, they have to go through that application process.
Yes.
Perfect. That was where I was trying to get to.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I went the other way. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor McNeil?
In that line, I have a comment, well, I guess kind of a question through the chair to council and administration. I think this is where the complexity comes in my mind, and specifically when we're talking about fire services. So a hypothetical example would be if, say we have somebody in Fort Assiniboine who maybe lost a loved one and to heart failure, and they want to donate some type of heart monitoring equipment to their emergency services at the Fort Assiniboine Fire Department. And they currently have the EMTs say in their department, everybody's qualified to run it. So we would direct them then to donate the funds to the fire the fire charity, which is fine. But then the fire charity goes and buys the equipment. The equipment then becomes an asset of Woodlands County for insurance purposes and all that, or I think before when we had talked about it, was the idea of they lease the equipment to the county for $1. So they retain ownership of the equipment, the society, the fire society, but the county then gets to manage it. So in a case like that, when we talk about fire services as one service, it's really, in that context, it's not one service. It's each individual fire department. And when someone's making a donation, very often these donations are incredibly personal. They're meant to apply to that community only. And then in the context of the way it's been discussed so far, if we had, say, Anselmo, and then Anselmo ended up getting an EMT that had the qualifications to use this piece of equipment, then somebody could arbitrarily decide to send that piece of equipment then to Anselmo, even though it was originally donated and intended for Fort Assiniboine. So I do think it is important that somehow in here we capture that context to make sure that we're protecting those donations in that respect for the jurisdiction for which they were meant for, if they were indeed meant for a specific area. If they were meant in general, then, this doesn't apply.
If I could, just for clarity before, and again, theoretically, we're gonna talk about the heart monitor. If somebody donated to Fort Assiniboine, say we have the Fort Assiniboine hall sitting on this piece of equipment, but we find usability, it's not being used in that hall, and it's the better usage would be in a different hall. I think before, regardless, whether we're moving it from one hall to another, I think we would be having those discussions with most likely the chiefs ahead of time, saying you have this equipment, yes, it's now a county asset, yes, it was donated to your hall, but functionally, it doesn't serve much of a purpose here, and it can be better utilized over here as far as the service levels that are created. If I'm kind of capturing what's written here.
Yeah.
Or practically or procedurally, what would most likely happen.
Yeah, through the chair, you're right, that's the intent. I think the important aspect of it, and it'll be provided to council at a meeting when the fire service review comes towards you, is from a governance perspective, council sets the service level for all fire departments. We are one fire department with multiple stations. And so council sets that service level. My concern would be, notwithstanding the emotional ties to donations and that sort of thing, if you set an operational service level and all of a sudden to meet that service level, you are tying one hand behind the back of administration to implement that, that would be a concern that I would have organizationally. I think the way that this is intended to be structured is a much more collaborative approach between the societies and the associations with the county. It's not just go buy something because we want it. If the society wants to go buy something as an appreciation gift to the members and buy a giant barbecue or something, we could care less. We're happy storing it there. It's not our asset, we're not gonna store it. But when it comes to life-saving equipment, that is a county asset, and we are required administratively to follow that service level. And I don't want that to be impacted because Aunt Martha donated that because we saved her husband's life from a heart issue, but now our demographics have changed and maybe we have to shift it. That's the intent of having the donation process with the conditions. And with the change that you've proposed, Councillor McNeil, if I was to propose a decline of a donation because it restricted our service level, I think that mitigates the concern now based on your addition, because I would be bringing that forward to council saying, here is a heart monitor system that's a great system. The problem is we're gonna restrict where it can go, and that's problematic because it doesn't align with your fire service bylaw. So I think that double catch is caught with the amendment that you're proposing to where I'm looking at declining or not in favor, bringing it back to council.
Councillor McNeil?
Thank you for that. I think this is great discussion and through the chair, like to council administration, like exactly the one you had just mentioned, I totally get that. One thing I would mention is we don't want Aunt Martha to decide not to donate,
Exactly.
you know, because she feels so strongly. But I think what came to my mind as you guys were talking, and the Reeve brought up a really good point as well, is that I think we could fix this fairly easily if the fire service, like I suggested, the fire service buys the asset, the fire association buys the asset. The fire association then makes the deal to donate to rent or donate the use of the asset to the county for whatever it is, $1. And if say it's for Fort Assiniboine, then the Fort Assiniboine Fire Association would own the asset. Woodlands County would manage it, just as if they owned it. Then, if the item ever came up in the future that, like the Reeve mentioned, it's not getting used, if it's not getting used and it could be better used somewhere else, then the question, it goes back to the association who owns it, who the money was donated, you know, to own it, so it's theirs. And then they would be able to make the decision on whether they wanted to take back the asset or move it on to the other. I think that would be a way of potentially making all parties happy.
Councillor Coolgan?
Yeah, I guess listening to the conversation, I think it's everybody's really aware that the service level that each different department is able to or does give to the community would also be an indicator. Obviously, the Fort Assiniboine Fire Service does a lot of medical stuff, so if there was a need for those donations, they probably will happen there. Blue Ridge does a lot more wildland stuff, so there's probably, so I think that we're starting to get into a place where we're covering all those bases because we have that history. So yeah, I'm fairly comfortable with where this is going.
Mr. Ferris?
So just to make sure that I understand the discussion, can I just recap if that works
Please.
for council? So there was a request to add under 1B unless authorized by council, particularly when it comes to flow-throughs. 2B was to add bequeath as an option for donation. Under 3A, we are going to add a charity clause so that any item where someone actually wants a charity receipt has to go to council instead of the CAO. The other discussion item was that the CAO will report any donations and any declining of donation, reporting any donations to council at the next meeting. And where there is a decline or a potential declination of administration, to those go to council, and changing the threshold to $1,000 instead of $35,000. So anything over $1,000 in value will go to council. And then I guess the other one was allowing for leased donations as a viable option for some assets. I believe those are the ones that I've heard, and
Just to administration on the, I guess on the leased option, if a society provides an item or buys an item and asks us to lease the item, and they're the ones utilizing it, and we're obviously on the maintenance end of it. Two questions. One, if the item fails when they're using it, or a part, kind of lets go, whose liability on that portion? Is it on us or is it on the society, given it's their item? To just something, because if we're looking at that end, or if there's going to be liability falling in societies, now we need to make sure that they are covered insurance-wise on it. Nextly, the other thing. Sorry, I had another, but I lost. So yeah, I just my biggest thing is liability. Or if we get to the end of life and they have this item that we've leased, or they don't want, is it now an expense that we have to buy off them, or are they going to give us the item, or how does that end of life, or that when they feel that it's needed to be more of a county asset, or they And you just, if we're looking at the leasing end, there's obviously, even if you lease a vehicle or you lease equipment, there's expenses at the end of it, and how does that utilize? But my concern would be if the item isn't ours and something happens to it when we're utilizing it and it causes an adverse effect or something in a situation, who's liable? 'Cause I doubt any of the associations would wanna have to carry extra, insurance. It's not what they're there for. But if it's theirs, they're gonna need to have some type of coverage.
Yeah, through the, to the chair, I guess. I guess the answer really depends. Yes, there would have to be a formal legal agreement vetted by legal to authorize that. I believe Councillor McNeil said we would be potentially take over management. So there is a liability aspect of all apparatuses that we check and a frequency that way, so that would need to be addressed. There would need to be, I would think, dual that is a question of dual insurance or single insurance. Should we insure an asset that isn't ours and then be on the hook for replacing said asset? That's a whole other question. They're all valid concerns. And I don't really have the answer for you, but we can investigate it further if that's a route council would like to go with when it comes to that.
Just for follow-up comment, and again, I would caution against putting that into this draft bylaw, given that we don't know where that would land and the unintended consequences that may come along with that. Councillor McNeil?
Definitely. So to kind of address a couple of the insurance things, the way that I would envision it would be that it would act the same as anything else that we would be renting that we would be responsible for. And when it comes to, you're right, it wouldn't necessarily have to actually be in this bylaw because any of those items are going to be worth more than $1,000, and it would be something potentially that administration would want to decline. So it could come to council and we could deal with it on a case-by-case basis if that's what council would choose to do. With the insurance part of it, I think the idea essentially would be, number one, we wouldn't want to accept a donation that we don't have use for. So I think that would be a thing that it would negate that. And then if we are agreeing that we want to take on this piece of equipment, then that's something that would have to align with our budget of the day. Or for example, if it was something that say required calibration annually that was say $100, pick a number, then maybe the society, that's written into the agreement. They provide the item and they pay for the calibration out of their funds, so it's not an expense to the county. So to answer the question, I think it could be addressed on a case-by-case basis if that's how council would choose, and then we wouldn't need to require to put it in here. But as long as it's known as a possibility when it comes forward, that we can look at those specific items as they come about.
Mr. Ferris?
Just recapping the items from the committee tonight, the only problem that I foresee that perhaps should be clarified more is if council is going to change, the committee is going to change 3A, that council authorizes the CAO to accept monetary donations and assets donated to Woodlands with an estimated value of up to $35,000. If someone comes in tomorrow, and so the proposal is to change that to 1,000, I believe. If someone comes in tomorrow with a check for $2,000, I have to take that to council. Perhaps the key wording is an asset, and the clarification should be that the CAO will always accept monetary donations without conditions if they're provided, because I think that would be problematic if a corporate sponsor comes in and says, we want to give you a donation, because it does happen, and I'm like, let me take it to council.
That's
Absolutely.
I think that's fair. Okay, so you have lots of direction there to, I guess, amend this and bring back for review.
Thank you for the thorough comments, I appreciate it.
Okay, if I can get a motion on 7.2. Councillor Kuchen?
Okay, I'll make the motion that the Governance and Priorities Committee direct administration to finalize the donations and acceptance of donated assets policy F5208, incorporating any governance level feedback provided by the committee, and to bring the policy forward to council for consideration and adoption.
Thank you, Counselor. Discussion on the motion? Not seeing any, I'll call that question. All in favor? And that's moved. It's been an hour and a half. We're halfway through this. Do we need to take a break, or does the committee want to continue?
Sure, just 2 minutes even.
Okay, well, just looking at the clock here, it's 6:35. Time everybody gets up. Let's try to be back here running for 6:45. Looks like everybody, just checking, Counselor Witten, I don't see you on the screen there, making sure you're back. Okay, we have everybody, we'll continue on with, where are we at here, 7.3, policy F5.209, tangible capital asset TCA policy draft.
I defer to Mr. Orwo to speak on this one, if it pleases committee.
Thank you very much, CEO, through the chair to the committee members. Before us today is the policy F-5.209, family is known as the tangible capital assets. Now, the last time this asset was looked at was 10 years ago, that is in 2016. And we have gone through in details to revise this particular policy. Now, the reason why tangible capital assets is very important is because it takes about almost 97% of all our non-financial assets. What that means is, if you look at our balance sheet today, the non-financial assets, tangible capital assets takes about 77 million of it. So there are a lot of assets in there that we need to look at. Now, one other thing that I would like to mention before we dive deep into other areas is just some of the key elements. We looked at the definitions. Now, before I even go there, I would like to draw your attention that I do have 4 attachments in there. The first attachment is the actual, which I would call a clean policy, unless there are changes or amendments. Then I do have also the one we call the tracked changes. So we looked at the old policy, then reformatted to pick our right format, because we developed a new format altogether for all our policies. And it tracks all the changes that we have. Then I've also attached the old policy that was passed, I think it was in 2016. Then the last part of it is I also did put in some municipal indicators that we're going to discuss. Now, moving forward, I would say that this policy also provides flexibility to adjust useful lives. And you'll see from the old policy to the new policy, the schedule will tell you exactly most of the changes that have been made in that area. But before we dive into those Schedule A, I would like to address the municipal indicators. Now, one of the reasons why I want to bring this one up, if you can go to the municipal indicators, what we have out there. If you recall, we've been discussing this quite a bit, and I remember it was also mentioned by Councillor St. Martin at one point. We have those 2 indicators, and if you look at those 2 indicators, they are all in red. That means we've been flagged by the province a few years now. So one of the key measures used to assess municipal asset sustainability is the ratio of new investment to tangible capital assets. Now, what that means here is the ratio is flagged when a municipality capital spending is less than the amortization. What that means is you're amortizing your assets, your current assets, but you're not replacing them. So that means we are not investing at all in our capital assets. And I think that is why that ratio is always 1 and above, but ours has been falling below 1. So Woodlands County has been flagged for a few years. The other indicator is the second one, the one that is 24.95%. So this second related sustainability indicator, it is now the net book value of our tangible capital assets, which is expressed as a percentage of the original cost. And when I'm talking about net book value here, I'm now taking the total cost of all our assets less the depreciation of those assets to date. Then the final number that gives you is expressed as a percentage of the original cost. And normally, the good ratio should be about 40%. And to us, it's 24. That means we are way out. So now we started addressing this thing some times back. How do we improve these indicators? And this led me to the schedules, the way the schedules were structured. Now, if you look at our old policy, that was passed in 2016, there is that threshold was very high to an extent that the county could not capitalize the assets. And I've given an example there For example, the capitalization of threshold for engineered structures was set at 100,000. That means everything that is below 100,000 was just expensed and of course were not capitalized. That is why some of those indicators were showing red, because we are depreciating our current assets, but we are not replacing them. Now, how do we solve that problem? Now that brings me now to the schedule itself. And first of all, I would probably take you to the old policy. If you look at the old policy, I'll just give you an example because it's a very long document. If you look at the old policy, if you bring up the old policy. Sure. Anyway, while we're waiting for the old policies, the other thing that I would like to mention to the committee members is all these assets totaling about 77 million, the net book value. Whatever happens, or what you will see in the balance sheets, or in what we call the statement of our financial position, will just the major assets. So you'll only be seeing land improvements, buildings, engineered structures, machinery and equipment, and the vehicles. And I think on the other side, if you're now trying to look at the life cycle of those assets, that is where the asset management comes in. And I think that's what they deal with. But for capitalization, the threshold is now very important. If you look at the old policy, go to the schedules. If you scroll to the schedule, yeah, if you go to the schedule, I think to engineered structures, for example.
The original one?
Yeah. Right there, if you go to
This is the old one, right?
yeah, go to engineered structures.
Right here.
30 years for bridges?
No, the engineered structure old policy should have 100,000. I just wanted to illustrate.
It says 100,000 third column.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if you look at that, that's 100,000. What that means, if you look at everything below that, whether it was bridges, whether it was curbs, whether it was streets, whether it was what, for it to be capitalized, it had to reach the threshold of 100,000. And that is why in Woodlands County, we were not capitalizing our assets because the threshold was too high. So what we've done is we started doing a lot of research out there to find out exactly what other municipalities are doing regarding this. Now we looked at more than 10 municipalities with the help of some consultants as well that was helping us, together with the infrastructure team before the previous director left. And we wanted to find out exactly what the threshold would look like to let us capitalize some of these assets. So based on those research, and I think we're also looking at the guidelines from the province, at the same time looking at the PSAB aspects. So that led us to the new table. And that is the second one, which I have there as for tracking changes. And that's what I want to run through very quickly. Then I will open for discussion. So if you look at the tracking changes, I think it's the second policy.
Yeah, I'm getting it.
So so we took that old policy, just looked at, put it in the correct format of this policy. Then I did give some highlights there. What you see in yellow is some of the changes that were made. So like in the purpose, we just structured in such a way and added some wordings there in line with the PSAB. Then we developed that policy statement, and some of them still mimics even the old policy because they remain the same. When it comes to the last bullet point there, it says policy does not apply to intangible assets, and I think I gave some examples of those intangible assets, because those are assets that you cannot see, and those ones cannot be capitalized, just for illustration. And then if you go to the next page, that is just to illustrate to the committee of the changes that we're making as we're formatting the document, making sure that we capture all those things that need to be captured and line them properly. Keep on going to page 4. One other thing that we added there was on communication towers. So before, we didn't have, just keep on going until the yellow.
Going down?
Yeah, we didn't have communication towers in our regional policy, and communication towers, some of them could be very expensive, that needs to be capitalized. So that is something new that we have also introduced in the new policy. And I think there are also some communication towers. They might not be very expensive, but in some of these fire halls, there's also some communication towers there. Moving along, the rest are just formatting to make sure that we capture everything. I think you went too far. You went too far. I want to illustrate something.
Communication tower?
No, let's go back.
Back up?
Yeah. Yeah, right there.
Okay.
So we'll just go slowly. There is reason I'm just going to areas where changes have been made as opposed to the old policy that has been in existence. Now, one thing that I added there that probably I would also seek for council input is I say that the CEO in coordination with the Director of Finance and Business Support shall have the authority to amend Schedule A useful lives when changes are required by accounting standards, or refer to engineers or manufacturers' recommendations for useful life when specialty assets do not align with those in Schedule A. So you'll realize that in most cases, as technology comes into play, there are a number of things that also takes place. Things in the olden days that could take maybe 10 years, with the new technology, they might extend to 20 years or to 25 years. Now, in such a case whereby, we need to change Schedule A, then in coordination, depending on what the manufacturer tells us, we can change, or that allows the CEO to change Schedule A. The other thing that I've also changed, that was an addition, that was not there before. The other thing that I've changed as well is the second one, that amortization for all assets acquired during the current fiscal year will commence at the beginning of the subsequent fiscal year. Now, the reason why I made that change is when I started looking at this policy very closely. Now, originally we had what we call the half-year rule. Half-year rule means there was an assumption directed by CRA that their assumption is an asset can be acquired mid-year. So what instead of capitalizing it by cost, you reduce it by 50%. But when I looked back, it has never been, they've never followed, Woodlands County has never followed the half-year rule. And I pulled the auditor's comment as well. It says no amortization is changed in the year of acquisition. So what was in the policy was not consistent with what we've been doing. So we acquire assets, let's say we acquire assets today in November, the depreciation will start at January of the following year. That is what has been happening. So the half-year rule, where 50% was to be applied, has never been applied in this county. So that one is again one of the changes that I made in line with what the auditors have. And the other part is the rest are just formatting. And then we come to Schedule A. It is in the Schedule A where there's so many changes and some additions. And the reason being is when working with the infrastructure team, the province, and looking at the trend where people are going, and I think before you could only see things like surface and subsurface and all those things, but looking at and talking to the experts, we started breaking them into hot mix, cold mix, how long will that take? Because there were some variations there. Now, if you move to other areas, there are some things that have also been added that were not in there before, and I think those are the ones that I've marked in green. like the sprinkler system on lawn, those ones are there and they take about 25 years. Those ones were not in existence in the previous policy. Communication, that was also broken down. If you look at the engineered structures, now the engineered structure, if you see, it was 100,000. Now we brought it down to 30,000. That means anything that is now spent up to 30,000 can be capitalized, or 30,000 and above can be capitalized. So if we continue with that trend, then I can assure you, you'll start seeing, changes in those municipal indicators, turning them into green from red, because we are now replacing our assets as the old ones depreciate, as opposed to now whereby more assets are depreciating, but there's no replacement, which is wrong because we are actually acquiring these assets, but we could not capitalize them because of that threshold was too high. So that is all we have, and I think those breakdowns continues all through. The other one that I wanted to identify is in the old policy, there's just one thing that was outside. It was on machinery and equipment in the old policy. They said heavy construction equipment variable. So variable meant that they could do whatever they want. They could just play around with whatever they want. So we looked into what is really happening in the real world, looking at the guidelines from the province, looking at other municipalities, and making sure that we identify the useful life for those heavy construction equipments. So now if you look at our construction equipments, if you look under equipments, the heavy construction equipments are now broken out. So that you see ranging from motor graders to loaders to tractors, all those things, the sanders, so that when they come into play, we know exactly the useful life. And for our amortization for committees information, we use what they call straight line. So we just take the cost of the asset and you divide it by the useful life. So at the end of the useful life, if at all there is anything left, we just call that one a residual value, which of course, if we sell and make money, it will either be a loss or a sale on fixed assets. I think I'll stop there for feedback from the committee and anything identified that we can work on before this policy comes back to council. And before I do that, there are two things I'd like to mention as well. I've referenced some policies there, the ARO policy, that is asset retirement obligations. Those ones were passed in the past, but there is some reference there. I've also referenced fleet life cycle management, a policy that has already been passed by previous council. And the reason why I'm referencing them is I wanted to make sure that the useful life that is reflected in that policy matches the useful life in the TCA policy, because it is the TCA policy that drives the financial statements, and those things align. And then the last thing I would like to mention is I did speak to the auditors because I requested that I wanted to make sure that we capitalize our 2025 assets before we close our books. And again, based on that, after agreeing with that, in my second motion, I'm requesting the committee to recommend to council to have the effective date retroactive to January 1 of 2025. What that means is it allows me, or it allows administration now to capitalize all assets in 2025 so that we improve our municipal indicators at the end of the year. I think I'll stop there for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Orwa. Councillor St. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Reeve, through to Director Orwa. I do have some questions. I did not see under the airport chain link fences. I saw it later in the schedule, but not under the airport. And there's, I would presume that the chain link fence at the airport is very valuable. My second question is in relation to bank stabilization or diversions. If I recall, quite a bit of work was done on the Freeman River. Is that something that we would capitalize or have a value attached to? And thirdly, value of timber on public lands, is that something we would value as a tangible capital asset? And I'm prepared to make the second motion after council has asked their questions.
Just for clarification on the chain link fence, Mr. Orwa, on page 10 of the appendix, where it mentions fences and gates right after the airport, would that accommodate chain link fence? It just doesn't give specified what type of fence, but fences and gates are listed on page 10 of the appendix.
Page 10 of the draft policy, John, top of the.
Right under airport.
So it goes airport and then it goes fences.
So it covers that, it covers the fences there, and I think there could be other fences as well that we're looking at.
Okay, I guess there's other questions that Councillor St. Martin had there for you too.
So the question, I think the first one was the Freeman River. I think that is probably something that I need to look at to make sure that I understand exactly where is that one is coming from, and looking at the value to ensure that it meets the threshold, because I don't know exactly what it entails. And then on the other one, I also need to look at the timber on the public land. And if at all it's something that needs to get into our policy, it will, that is when we come to council, but I need to do some research there as well.
Was there a couple other points of clarity you're looking for, Councillor St. Martin?
No, that I think that covers everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McNeil?
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Orwa. Actually, my comment was, I just wanted to thank you. I thought that your RFD and the policy was extremely well done. I really appreciated the track changes and your attention to detail and the cross-referencing of the other section. So I really had no questions. I thought you explained everything very, very well, and it's important policy. I'm glad to see that hopefully we'll get our municipal indicators in line. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have more, Mr. Oro? I know you say you're gonna hold there. Do you have more information to go through?
No, I don't.
Okay, I just checking. So, Mr. Ferris?
Just to build on Councillor St. Martin's comment, the issue really depends when it comes to the slope stability. I would argue that if the slope stabilization is occurring within the road allowance of the titled property, we could probably argue that you're doing it to extend the road's useful life. And so we could probably capitalize it. Where it becomes problematic is if we have an asset from let's say a park reserve and then the road, and we're preserving the park reserve, I think that's where it becomes problematic. But if the road allowance is the piece that we're protecting and it's clear, I think you should be able to capitalize it with under the public service accounting standards.
Councillor St. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Reid. Through to Director Slutwig. I know you're very versed in the history of the county. If I recall, there was quite a bit of work done. I don't recall if it was relative to the secondary highway or if it was in fact along private properties. But I know there was quite a bit of work done, and you may know more about it than I do. Thank you.
Through the chair to Councillor St. Martin, there was work done specifically to the highway and the bridge, which was a multi-million-dollar investment, but that was majority paid through by the province, is my understanding. And the other one was private property, in which we did some engineering to see if there was any possibility of stabilization of the property. But beyond that, there was nothing, the county didn't contribute in respect to any of the stabilization of that. It was left to the landowner's decision as to whether they were going to bear that cost or not.
Thank you, Ms. Lubeg. Councillor Kuchen?
Yeah, through the reeve to John, Director Orwa. Really appreciate that whole presentation. It's made it a lot more clear that a lot of discussions I had with Jeff over what he wanted to do at Goose Lake, where he wanted to start to capitalize some of those projects because it had always been done under operations. And he felt that it was necessary so you cleared up a lot of the fog for me there. And with that, I'd be prepared to make motion one that the Governance and Priorities Committee recommend that council rescind policy number 1516's tangible asset, capital asset policy.
Thank you, Councillor. Discussion to the motion? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All in favor? It's carried. And Councillor St. Martin, save your blame for Councillor. Motion 2.
That the Governance and Priorities Committee recommends that council adopts policy F-5, decimal 2.09, tangible capital asset policy, with including discussion of the committee with an effective date retroactive to January 1st, 2025 to permit capitalization of 2025 assets in accordance with the new Schedule A.
Thank you, Councillor. And just for clarification on the include discussion, does administration kind of bullet points or notes on what the discussion topics are?
So the discussions that we have was the fences was addressed. The potential capitalization of stability as we are able to claim it. And then the other question was value of timber. And so the capitalization of timber is problematic. Potentially we can capitalize it if we're clearing road right of ways, that sort of thing, but on other lands, there's an issue that way, but we can make sure that it's addressed within the policy as requested.
Okay. And just for clarification from Councillor St. Martin, is that does that capture the discussion that you're referring to?
Mr. Reeve, yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, just making sure administration has clear marching orders. Any other discussion on the motion? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that is moved. And 7.4, bylaw 639-26, the CAO bylaw draft.
So this bylaw is an attempt to update from the current bylaw 525/19. It was adopted in 2019. Ultimately, distinguishing the roles of council and the administrative role of the CAO. Administration has identified some operational and legal gaps in the existing bylaw. There's also been some consistent ambiguity issues regarding authorities and accountabilities and decision making. And regardless of where the committee takes that recommendation, I think it's important to know that those are part of the issue that I think are causing some problems. There was a discussion also to bring this and terms of reference from an HR committee to the first GMP meeting. We are unable to find the terms of reference of that HR committee that was also requested within the motion. We have found a terms of reference for an internal staff committee relating to HR policies, but we are not able to find the terms of reference for the council one. When we started the review, we reached out to ARMA to do an analysis of what other administrations are dealing with in terms of their CAO bylaws. In the review, the most recent one that was updated was done as Parkland County. We also then correlated that with other ones that were provided within the working group, and then looked at other ones from different municipalities, County of Grand Prairie, St. Albert, Spruce Grove, to get some benchmarks and to try and ensure that we were kind of in line. And so when we did that, the opinion administratively was to take that as a template rather than work off of our current bylaw. Going forward, I think also from a process discussion, knowing what this council's preference is when it comes to updates. If an item is so fundamentally different in the opinion of administration than the current version, I do question the value of track changes, but if that's the preference that council wants to have, we can make sure that is addressed. Ultimately, the MGA states that you must establish the position of CAO and you may delegate powers and functions and duties. In terms of major changes, the big one that I know is partially a concern, but it is worth clarifying, is the Human Resources Authority. In the opinions provided by legal, as part of our orientation packages with various organizations, the CAO is appointed by council, but the authority to administer HR really is the CAO, managing staff, implementing that, overseeing operations, discipline, investigation, staff management are all operational functions. This aligns with the MGA, this provides with legal opinions we've been provided. The intent of the changes when it comes to HR matters within this policy is to clarify that there is current ambiguity requiring council's notification prior to organizational changes, I think is one of them. The reference to an HR policy that does not exist, while individual small policies exist, the one as drafted within the current bylaw does not. In terms of procurement and contracting, this will formally delegate contract execution. It clarifies the emergency authorities in our opinion. It allows to delegate work. MGA does allow the CAO to sub-delegate powers. It clarifies rules on acting CAOs. But I think that the key that we're struggling with administratively is where those lines are. And for example, it does say that all taxation powers that can be distributed to the CAO would be in this draft bylaw. Now, that does not take away council's authority to pass taxation bylaws. It does not take away council's authority to set rates or establish property classes. It only reflects the authority administrative function, applying penalties, adding authorized charges, administering enforcements. The county's current tax rate bylaw already authorizes the CAO to levy rates set by council. That's an administrative, so this isn't a new function, this is a clarification in that attempt. That said, if council wishes, that clause can be clarified further to reference specifically administrative taxation functions if the concern is a legislative overreach. It does provide the authority to appoint an acting CAO. Now, currently, the historical practices of Woodlands County has the CAO has been authorized to appoint a acting CAO, whether they're on leave or that sort of thing. This formalizes that authority that if it's less than 30 days, I would have the ability to appoint an acting person. The opinion and reasoning for that would be depending on the time of year, depending on the issues facing the organization in that very time, who I select from the directors as the best candidate can vary. I do not question the competencies and abilities of any of my directors, but everyone has their strong suits, their specialties. And I think operationally, having the CAO select that person during times of leave based on operational requirements makes the most sense. The MGA does allow for a CAO to delegate their authority to their staff. An acting CAO position is a temporary delegation. It is not a redirection of council authority to appoint the CAO. It's a common practice in municipalities across Alberta. CAOs have leave times, life events occur, and there's times when they are unavailable, and this addresses that. Similarly, when we took the Parkland County version as a model, it was already in there. In terms of the HR issues, there is been some very good discussions we've had on what is an HR governance matter versus HR CAO matter. I don't dispute that council should probably have some say or say entirely in salary grids, compensation philosophy, whether bonuses are applied or whether they're not, that sort of thing. Even council does have the control of staffing levels. You approve a budget that includes so many people in it. If that is too much and council cuts, the budget discussion lets you govern HR matters. Operationally, orientations, probation, overtime practices, boot allowances, training, discipline, department restructurings, reporting, those are all operational concerns. If council wishes to strengthen oversight, I think the route, this bylaw should be used as a mechanism that sets what the expectations for the CAO is. Policy, I think, is the best location to strengthen that oversight. It is not a control aspect of the CAO. Things change, operational needs change. Policies give you that flexibility. If the requirements for certain HR reporting need to occur, then you put it in policy as a requirement. I would not recommend you put detailed explanations within your CAO bylaw. Best practice is to keep it high level. In terms of questions on the authority of the CAO to terminate with or without cause, that section to me is entirely operational. The concerns about due notice and due payments and legislative requirements when it comes to termination pay and that sort of thing, this bylaw does not neglect those requirements. If someone is being terminated with cause to ensure it's covered by insurance, by our insurance provider, it needs to be legally vetted. These are all processes that are currently in place, and the intent here is to clarify those things. There isn't similarly, this was a similar wording that is within Parkland County, and I don't want to keep re-quoting Parkland County. They were the ones we used as the model to build this new model, so there is a lot of similarities that way. In terms of procurement authority, any concerns council has regarding thresholds and trade agreement compliance and multi-year contracts, those are valid concerns. I wouldn't say that they're not. I would say the place for those concerns, though, is not in the CAO bylaw. That is in the policies that set the governance direction of this county. And council should put those in policies. Those procurement thresholds are already in policy. We have financial control policies. If we need to strengthen our budget control policies so that certain reporting is provided to council that you want, we can do that. The recommendation, though, is you don't put it in the CAO bylaw. We can develop or update your procurement and financial policies to ensure you're happy, but it is not the place to put it in the CAO bylaw in my recommendation. Currently, the MGA lets administration delegate its powers. I fully agree with some of the concerns I've heard about a operational best policy with some level of delegation tracking. I've said it once, I'll say it again. The way this organization needs to improve its tracking processes are administrative that way. Currently, some of these delegations have been assigned by email, which I don't think is necessarily best practice. Some have had formal letters written. I fully agree that requiring some operational control through a registry of delegation is important. And I have no issues committing to developing that. And more importantly, reporting it to council. You should know where I've said, hey, I'm not going to be fully responsible for this. We're going to rely on some of our excellent team members because I cannot do it all myself, and nor should I. And so putting in those types of reporting requirements, I think, are entirely appropriate at a policy level or an expectation level. If you want to put them into the bylaw, that's reasonable as well. In terms of financial guardrails and concerns that way, the financial guardrails are policy restrictions. We have restrictions on purchasing policies. We currently have restrictions, I believe, within that purchasing policy on emergency management costs. Those guardrails have already been established by council, and in my opinion, best practice, they are in policy. In closing, I think a lot of this is modernization for the CAO bylaw. This is not an attempt to take control from council's governance. Council governs through policy and bylaws. I fully recognize that. Your authority remains intact. This is common best practice. From an HR management perspective, I would say we have been advised numerous times the HR functions rest with the CAO. If there's a reporting function concern there, we can address that. But you have to outline what the reporting and what those expectations are. But ultimately, I do question council making the call on leave policies, that sort of thing. It's not fully a level of service, but how we manage and entice our staff is 100% operational. If there's other aspects that need reporting, I think we can do it. These are our common best practices. In closing, like the last policy, this bylaw was vetted by legal in terms of legality and accuracy. And there wasn't any overstep that way. But we're happy to address this policies or this bylaw, I don't know why I keep saying that, to reflect the needs of council while clarifying the responsibilities that I have.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Open it up to council. Councillor McNeil.
Alright, I can jump in on this one. A few things. So definitely, well, one of the things right from our first elected official training with in regards to the employment of the CAO, it would.
Sorry, sound issue if you can hear us.
I don't think she can hear us either.
Reviewed by.
Sorry, Councillor McNeil. We'll have to-
With that in mind.
Councillor
and
McNeil?
In the review,
Can you hear us?
the notes that I had sent forward, of course, about definitely, I do have is
Can you hear us now?
everybody hear me?
No, they
Yes.
can't.
I can hear you. Can you
Okay,
hear me?
you dropped out right at the beginning of where you were talking. We're just getting the camera or the sound going again.
Okay, my apologies. So the, in regards to our first elected official training, so the employment in regards to the CAO, a number of times throughout that training, they had mentioned this is one of the most important bylaws of the municipality and the importance of having legal consult, so on the bylaw itself. And that's something, we haven't been as council provided with any legal consult. We did discuss the HR portion before, and there was legal consult on that, but as discussed at our meeting, we also didn't have input into what the questions were asked. So there was some ambiguity around what had come back from that in regard to that discussion. So based on that and in my research, I am of the opinion that there is a over-delegation of legislative authority. And as, you know, administration had admitted, you know, in their presentation just now, there is some lines on the taxation side as well that are blurred. You know, when he had mentioned about there's some concerns with the definitions around the HR delegation, et cetera. So based on that, I'm prepared to, and with the timing, to make a motion that council directs administration to forward the draft chief administrative officer bylaw to legal for external municipal legislative review to confirm. 1, compliance with the Municipal Government Act and all their applicable provincial enactments. 2, that no provisions improperly delegate, transfer, or fetter council's statutory governance authority. 3, that the bylaw clearly distinguishes between council's governance role and the administrative authority of the chief administrative officer. 4, that no human resource, financial, taxation, procurement, or settlement authorities are delegated beyond what is contemplated or permitted under the Act. And 5, that the notes submitted by Councillor McNeil and myself respecting the CAO bylaw legislation and governance review, which is 2026-0214, be appended to the materials provided to legal counsel on support an efficient and informed review and avoid duplication of research. And further, that the bylaw be amended in accordance with the legal recommendations and brought back to a future governance and priorities committee meeting for consideration.
Speaking to the motion, Councillor St. Martin.
I'd like a friendly amendment to include my recommended changes as well, in being sent with Councillor McNeil's. I won't go into detail, but Bill 50 requires that the chief administrative officer shall report and be accountable to council for exercising natural person powers. I didn't see that in there. So there's a number of clauses here that I think warrant inclusion in this bylaw. Therefore, I'd like that friendly amendment to Councillor McNeil's motion.
Councillor McNeil, you accept the friendly amendment?
Yes, I do. Under section 5, I'll enter that friendly amendment.
Okay, any other discussion on the amended motion? Again, just for caution, we are voting on a motion to send to legal without seeing the referenced items. With that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? And that's defeated. Okay. Councillor St. Martin?
Hey, Mr. Reeve, I'd like to go through the proposed amendments that I have.
Okay.
I'd like to see insertion of a new clause 3, and the title would be accountability. 3.1, the chief administrative officer shall report and be accountable to council for exercising all of their duties, powers, and responsibilities. 3.2, where council's established a policy, the chief administrative officer must not take actions contrary to that policy. A new clause 4 regarding reporting. The chief administrative officer shall report and be accountable to council for exercising natural person powers. Clause 3.3, I'd like to see, rather than 30 days, no longer than 3 consecutive weeks. And that the appointment of the acting chief administrative officer be upon approval of council. Now I don't know the clauses after this. I assume it's now gonna be 5.3. I'd like to see that struck. And it state the chief administrative officer shall utilize consistent comparator municipalities, surveys from rural municipalities of Alberta and Alberta municipalities when determining wages, benefits, and other conditions of employment, ensuring fairness, consistency, and transparency. Clause 4.4, I'd like to see council retains authority over strikeout governance level employment policies and matters related to employment of the chief administrative officer. It's the revised clause in its original, it's 4.5.1. It requires that establishing and amending the organizational and departmental structure, provided that any changes with budgetary implications are reflected through the budget or reported to council for approval, strike out information. The original bylaw 4.5.5, remove the capital T. 5.5.6, I'd like to add at the end of this, comma, as soon as practical, copies shall be provided to council. And this is respecting conducting audits, investigations, and studies of the county's operations. I'd like to see some guards here. So the existing clause 6.1.14, the CAO nor the assistant CAO does not have authority to reallocate funds within an approved operating or capital budget. 6.1.15, the CAO or the acting CAO does not have authority to authorize an unbudgeted expenditure unless it's an emergency, as outlined in clause 7.2. Clause 6.1.16, the CAO shall not reallocate funds within an approved budget to create a new service, program, or a project without council approval. 6.1.17, the CAO shall not reallocate funds within an approved capital budget that will result in cancellation of a capital project or creation of a new capital project without council approval. And then 6.2.4, the CAO shall, prior to initiating significant changes to the county's organization structure where the change impacts service level or budget, shall obtain prior approval prior to initiating significant changes. Delegation. 8.1, the chief administrative officer shall report to council any delegation or sub-delegation of any power, duty, or function to council as soon as practical. 8.4, when the chief administrative officer delegates any power, duty, or function, such delegation shall be to a designated officer. And I can provide those amendments in writing to the CAO.
Mr. Ferris?
Just a couple points of clarity if I can. So amendments 4.4, to make sure that I understand the concern. Currently it reads, council retains authority over governance level employment policies and matters relating to employment of the CAO. So the recommendation is council retains authority over employment
policies.
So to be clear, that is against the advice of legal. But if that's the way council wishes to go, that is possible.
Mr. Reeve through to CAO Ferris. It is an option that council can retain it or they can delegate it. There's nothing requiring council to delegate.
He was just advising us of legal's opinion on the amendment.
Correct, thank you.
And then just a couple items on the reallocation. I think you said 6.1.4 reallocations of funds. Pay expenditures authorized through the budget in any amounts what the county is legal. Required to pay pursuant to order, judgment, court, board, or other tribunal. Was that the right clause, Councillor St. Martin?
It was an addition of new clauses after 6.1.13.
Okay, so just to be clear, there is some authority currently granted to administration under the purchasing policy that does allow for some reallocations within department budgets. So that policy we can bring back to amend if that is a change, but currently there is some ability for reallocations within current budgets as authorized by council in the purchasing policy. Further to that, you mentioned that the CAO would require authorization from council to start a new project. Now, that administratively, of course, that would be a concern for me, but from a clarity point of view, what is the intent of the project? A project could be as simple as me assigning a task to one of our staff to develop a new procedure. That could be interpreted as a project. If I could just get some clarity on what you mean by project to better understand that concern, because that does become problematic where if I was to assign anything to staff, potentially, if interpreted wrong, I would have to come to council for permission.
Councillor St. Martin?
Okay. Mr. Reeve through to CAO Ferris. I'm gonna go back to 6.1.14, the CAO does not have authority to reallocate funds within an approved operating or capital budget. And I want to be clear here. I think as our budget becomes a more comprehensive document that provides more information, like the level of budget we have today it's not clear what is changing within the various functions and line items.
Okay.
It's highlighted in an RFD, but it's not clearly, so what I'm saying is I think once the budget document becomes improved upon and is clear and that we can follow if a new position's been added or if money has been moved from one area to another and we can see that clearly, I think maybe we can revisit this. But for now, because it isn't clear, and I'm concerned with the statement that was made that it's a shell game and things can be moved, that creates a red flag for me. So that is why I'm recommending 6.1.14. So that's clarification on that one. Now, clarification on 6.1.17, I believe is what you asked.
The projects one.
Okay. If it is, adds more clarity, we could add capital or operating projects approved by council. So if there's a change. So clarity here, we get a 5-year capital plan, very clear, okay? What is not clear to me in the operating budget is the operating projects. So for example, the new
Welcome guide.
yeah, or even, you know, the new accounting systems. You know, that's an operating project, and we're buying software, we're buying all this stuff. I would like to see what those operating projects are, because I don't believe it's fully clear in our operating budget. So if that could be a separate document similar to our capital projects, to me, it would be very clear. Okay. But as far as those are the projects that we would be approving, and if there were changes, it should come to council. So if you have other smaller operational things, no, I wouldn't expect that to have to come to council. But any larger operating projects, I would feel should come to council.
If I may, just one last clarification on the delegation proposed amendments. Two, limiting it to strictly designated officers could be problematic just in terms of work structure, but that's one. The other thing is, I fully acknowledge we should have a reporting structure. I would question if perhaps we look at a quarterly reporting structure or something along those lines rather than at the next council meeting. But that would be my only feedback. I think it's an excellent idea. It's just the frequency would be the real concern I'd have.
Okay,
So, Mr. Reed, those were my comments for changes. I don't know if Councillor McNeil has additional
and
concerns.
my comment I have here with the additions, the proposed 3.3, I don't have issues with the appointment after 3 consecutive weeks, having appointed by council. My issue with making it finite that we have to have the individual approved, at that point at council instead of just having the CEO delegated, is if life happens and he has to leave the office, we, say a funeral or a family event and he's gone we don't have the opportunity and the time to pre-approve that. So now we're gonna be making approvals after the situation or at the next, but if something happened, putting it in the policy that this has to happen ahead of time, I don't feel, depending on the circumstance, given that it's a short leave or a holiday or a bereavement, or it could be something happens where he's sick for a few days, that we have the opportunity always to be able to make that approved appointment from council ahead of time. So I'm okay with the 3, but I would caution against the approved by council ahead of time on that. And then for me, just a discussion, I'm still got the floor, I'm talking.
Okay, sorry.
Then on the 6.1.14 that's being proposed, just for me, and again, the discussion that we're having here makes it sound, when we're talking about budget lines and we're not there, and a lot of the discussion makes it sound like we're not trusting the information that administration is giving us. And I just, you know, administration does put, you know, and the comments about a shell game. I understand there are people in the public who, any type of money that goes out, whether it's in a business or fiscally or any level of government, always believes that money is going around in a shell game and it's swapping back and forth where people don't see it. I believe that our administration has been very transparent in what they've been trying to do. They've always been forthcoming with information, and I just personally take a little offense to the fact that people, you know, the comment that we're running this as a shell game, given we've been here for a while, we've seen, you know, the changes and everything that have come through in this administration, and I don't know if we need to have them under a microscope for absolutely everything they do if they're still working within their budgetary lines. I have Councillor McNeil next, please.
Okay, actually, through the chair, I'm fine with Councillor St. Martin having a redirect before I start my list.
Councillor St. Martin?
Mr. Reid, to provide clarification on some of your concerns, excuse me, the CAO definitely does have authority to delegate some of his roles and duties to subordinate staff. However, we're talking about appointment of an acting chief administrative officer. Council can call a council meeting with less than 24 hours if we have to make a decision. And, you know, yes, there's lots of different things that can happen in life. But appointing of the acting CAO, I would say should remain with council. So that's my response to that. And with respect to 6.1.14, the budget that we have received, you can't track what's changed from version to version. Numbers, there's no tracking. I couldn't track what was happening from each version of the budget. That is concerning. And I hope we will get to the point, and I know that at one time Woodlands County actually had an information sheet for each line in the budget, and anything that was changed was stated in that information sheet. Now, is that a good practice? No, I think there are better ways to do this, and there's clearer ways to do this. And because council is responsible, and it's one of the largest policy documents that we have to make decisions on, we deserve to have clear information and tracked properly and open so that we can see every change in the budget from version to version. And we haven't had that. We've had a major structural change on our operating budget from the 2025 budget. And it's been very difficult to follow that through. I hear your concern, but it wasn't me or any member of council that stated the shell game. It was the CAO that stated that. So if you have concerns with that terminology, I think you need to have that discussion with the CAO. Okay, thank you.
Councillor McNeil?
Through the read, and so I'm gonna try and go through this as quickly as possible and touch on the high-risk clauses that I'm most concerned about. And essentially what I'll say is my focus when I'm reviewing a bylaw especially is a bylaw is a document that needs to stand alone, and it needs to be devoid of, you know, what the intent was. Intent needs to be in the text of bylaw, because if we're challenged, it's going to be something that will be challenged to live on its own. So that's the context of where my comments come from. So under section 2.1 on the acting CAO appointment, and where it's the draft allows the appointment, as we've discussed, 30 days or less. Okay, the legislative conflict, of course, is MGA section 205 and 206 require council to appoint the CAO by resolution. MGA 203 subsection 2I prohibits delegation of the CAO appointment authority. Those clauses in the MGA are extraordinarily clear. So there's no statutory authority permitting a CAO to appoint their own replacement. That being said, the concerns the REIV and the CAO brought up, absolutely, life happens. What council can do is council can pre-approve. Maybe we pre-approve 3 directors that the CAO and council agree on, so that so then the CAO could in turn delegate to one of those directors that is then pre-approved by council. And that would be a quick and easy workaround that we could do and meet the legislative requirement and meet the needs of administration. So that one, like I said, definitely doesn't need to be a difficult fix. Okay, moving on to section 2.2, with or without just cause, termination language. So draft, it permits termination with or without just cause, and the legal exposure is municipalities remain subject to common law employment obligations, and I know it was brought up in the RFD. The MGA does not override it, so including the phrase in a bylaw does not eliminate notice, but it can introduce ambiguity. It can be interpreted as it attempting to contract out of employment law and increase damages in litigation and trigger, reputational harm. So which puts us at litigation risk, financial risk, increased settlement risk. A required correction, not difficult, in accordance with the applicable employment law and any written employment agreement. It's basic municipal employment drafting practice. Okay, so that should be an easy fix in my mind. 2.3, HR policy amendment and repeal authority. I know we've discussed this, at length in different meetings, but the governance risk, of course, is it reverses, our presumption under council governance section 2.0 or section 201 of the MGA. Legislative powers cannot be delegated by default without clear distinction between governance level employment policies and the administrative procedures. Council risks unintentionally surrendering oversight of the areas I'm most concerned about are discipline frameworks, investigations, whistleblower processes, and workplace conduct systems. Our risk to council, of course, is a loss of policy control, exposure during HR disputes, and erosion of our governance authority. The required correction explicitly reserved to council approval of any policy that affects discipline, investigations, code of conduct, whistleblower, and governance level compensation frameworks. Okay, moving on to 2.4, over delegation of all taxation powers. And I know we discussed this a little bit, or Councillor St. Martin brought it up, but under the draft, it authorizes the CAO to exercise, quote, all the taxation powers and responsibilities assigned to a municipality under the Act, end quote. The legislative conflict is that taxation bylaws and rates must be set by council under Part 10 of the MGA. It's very clear, once again, legislative taxation powers cannot be transferred. Administrative functions may be delegated, but legislative powers cannot. So a risk to council is ultra vires delegation, which is operating outside of the law or delegating outside of our legislative authority. Legal challenges to the tax decisions, audit findings, and provincial scrutiny. So we need to replace that with, quote, administrative taxation functions as permitted under the MGA. Again, structurally, not a difficult fix. Under 2.5, procurement authority without reporting guardrails. In the draft, it allows preparation and award of all procurement within approved budgets. The governance gap is that there's no mandatory reporting thresholds, no reference to trade agreement compliance, no multi-year contract guardrails, and the risk to council is the financial oversight erosion, long-term commitments beyond the budget year, particularly long-term commitments if it ends up being through an election cycle. Because if we approve a 3-year project and we're in our last year, then that's putting, some additional stresses on the new council. Trade agreement exposure and reputational risk. So I would recommend that we add that there's mandatory quarterly procurement reporting, disclosure of exemptions, and confirmation of trade agreement compliance, and explicit limitation on multi-year obligations without future appropriation. And stated in that, CEO Ferris had mentioned that definitely we have a procurement policy, but in the procurement policy as well, and it would make sense, like we're here not to pass this as law with the, at this committee level, I think the policy should be consulted as he suggested. But we also need to keep in mind that this is a bylaw, and what is decided in this bylaw will be the overarching document that manages the policies. Under 2.6, delegation and subdelegation, the draft allows broad further delegation. There's no requirement for like written delegations, what the scope limits are of delegating, duration, and delegating a delegation registry. And I know the CEO mentioned as well that maybe that's something that he could look into if council so chooses, but of course, the risk with it is just unclear authority chains, decision validity challenges, and potential audit findings. So it's, again, not a difficult fix, just a written delegation instrument, central delegation register or something of that type, and reporting to council. Under 2.7, appointment, evaluation, and removal clarity. The bylaw does not embed a 2/3 vote for requirement of revocation or an annual written performance evaluation requirement, which is a minimum requirement of the MGA. And they're both statutory obligations under sections 2.05-1 and section 206. Leaving them unstated, it increases our risk during leadership transitions. So basically, in the line by line, those are some of the concerns. One of the concerns, and even to point out here, is with going through the number of challenges, this CAO bylaw, and I guess also to highlight, yes, there was some changes required, such as Councillor St. Martin mentioned, like with Bill 50 and those requirements, but the bylaw we have in place currently is really not that bad. A few minor tweaks, in my mind, a few of those edits, and this could have been all managed and handled in short order. I don't see that it really needed to have this extensive rewrite, and it would have saved council and administration a ton of time. So those are the biggest concerns that I have, to read those into the record. Of course, the document council and administration has of my comments for review, and the biggest, like I said, is a summary of the high-risk items, is just making sure that we're acting within compliance of the MGA and that we're not losing sight of that, and that council is making sure that we are retaining our authority under the MGA, and that we're not abdicating our silence or abdicating our oversight through silence. So these are things that I want to make sure council's aware of, so that when we're looking forward and we can have this bylaw stand on its own. And once the draft bylaw is completed, I still highly recommend, based on the training that we have had as well, that the final draft has a complete vetting by legal. And those are my comments.
Just question for administration, given we've been doing this here for a few of them. A vetting through legal, what ballpark are these costing us? I mean, we've had a few already, so.
So legal opinion will run, through the chair, somewhere between $2,000 and $6,000. A bylaw is probably in the $3,000 to $10,000, depending on its complexity.
Great, thank you for that. Councillor McNeil?
As a redirect to that, definitely if council has extreme concerns and we're dealing with the budgets that we cannot afford to have a proper legal vetting of our bylaws, then one thing that could be considered would be, like I mentioned, the bylaw that we currently have, to be legislatively accurate, only needed a few minor changes. And if council is concerned about the cost of legal, then maybe they want to consider going forward with the current bylaw and making only the required legislative changes.
And with due respect, the legal opinion we have currently says that the CAO draft bylaw that's been presented does meet the requirements that we need. That was already provided at the beginning of this from our CAO. So we want to, if we're going to add other changes or add extra pieces to it, it's not the same bylaw that has been currently vetted through legal. And my concern is not the fact that, you know, where we are budgetary. My concern with the cost of legal is that we are continuously, seeming like every meeting we have, sending something else for legal. And if you take legal opinion on a legal opinion, it adds up in a hurry when you have lots of these opinions in a short order. That's my concern. Councillor McNeil?
As a redirect, absolutely, I agree with you in that I most certainly don't think we should be wasting money on unfounded legal opinion. I think that when we do go for legal opinion, as I crafted in the procedural motion that I put forward, we need to be very specific and on the items of concern and provide as much information for a concise legal review so that everybody and council and administration can all be on the same page for what are our issues and what are we asking, and that we can ask them all at once. Just as to your comment about legal, when we had brought up the discussions earlier about the other items that went for legal, we were not provided with the questions that went. They didn't necessarily answer the questions we had, and there was some confusion about that. And that was my effort in trying to be more concise and put forward my asks so that they are very clear going to legal, so that we don't run into these issues where we're having multiple legal opinions. And in addition to that, if there is a legal opinion on a document that comes before council, then I fully expect to have that full legal opinion presented in the RFD with the document that we are to consider.
Thank you. Well, with that, I'm gonna make a motion with the amendment of ours on 4.5.5 that the should have a small t, not a capital T. And that the Governance and Priority Committee direct administration to bring the proposed CAO bylaw forward to a future council meeting for consideration of first reading. I have a motion on the floor. Speaking to the motion, Councillor St. Martin.
Mr. Reeve, would you consider a friendly amendment to bring it back to the next GNP meeting?
No, I'm going to let the motion stand and I want to see where it falls. Any other discussion on the motion? Councillor Dean?
Through the read, I guess to the read, does your motion include Councillor St. Martin's proposed amendments?
No, my motion goes off of the one amendment for the letter in 4.5.5. The rest of this has been legally vetted. I'm gonna go with a legally vetted opinion that Brownlee knows what they're talking on this, so I'm gonna leave the motion where it stands. Councillor St. Martin speaking to the motion.
I'd like a recorded vote, please.
Okay. Councillor McNeil.
Just speaking to the motion, I want it reiterated that we have not been provided with the legal opinion on this version of the CAO bylaw.
Mr. Ferris.
I can clarify. So the bylaw was provided to legal and updated accordingly. There was not a legal opinion. The document itself was sent to legal for verification. Because it is an entirely new document, I thought it would be rather unproductive to attach a track changes to a bylaw that council hadn't seen before. The bylaw before you was vetted by legal. And it's before you that way. In terms of track changes, there isn't a track changes because that bylaw did not exist beforehand and it is fundamentally different in the opinion of administration from the previous bylaw.
Thank you. So with that, we call the question to move this to council for consideration. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, it's defeated. So what do we wanna do here, people? Just checking. Counselor St. Martin?
I'd like to propose a motion that the committee direct administration to incorporate the amendments as discussed. And I am prepared to provide a written list of those amendments to the CAO. And I'm sure Councillor McNeil will as well. The amendments be incorporated into the bylaw and the draft be brought back to a GMP meeting for further review and consideration.
Any discussion to the motion? Not seeing any, call the question. All in favor? Opposed? It's passed. With that, takes us to number 8 for adjournment. If I get a motion to adjourn. Councillor Wright,
Make a motion that the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting be adjourned at 8 p.m.
Councillor, no discussion on the motion to adjourn. Call the question. All in favor? And we're adjourned at 8:12. Thank you, everybody.